What we're going to talk about today, starting with animals, and we're going to start with maybe the most confusing part of all of it, which is how embryos work in an animal. Now there's a lot of writing on here. This is all posted on Moodle. What I'm saying will be on Moodle. There's an outline on Moodle. All this stuff is in there. Basically, there's 4 stages of embryonic development in animals, most animals at least. The first one you know about, fertilization. We know in fertilization, haploid sperm gets together with haploid egg and makes diploid zygote. Now here's the thing. Not only does the zygote get formed, but it also starts to align itself along 3 major axes. Anterior, posterior, dorsal, ventral, and left, right. You need to know what these words mean. And it's easier to explain them in terms of a 4-legged animal. And I'm not going to waste time trying to draw some pretty animal. Here's my 4-legged animal. All right, anterior, posterior. Anterior refers to the head side, the front side of an animal. So this is anterior. Posterior is just what it sounds like. It's the rear side. Where's dorsal? You all know that. Like the dorsal fin on a shark. Dorsal is the back. Along the backbone. And then the belly side is ventral. Now in you, where would anterior be? In a 2-legged organism. Where's anterior? Head. Posterior, bottom. Ventral is belly. Dorsal is back. And so think of yourself bent down on all 4s, and you get the same thing. Okay? Same thing. All right, then obviously left to right. Now the next thing that happens is cleavage. Now you guys should know by now, cleave means to what? Cut, split. Okay? So this is when the cell starts to split. And it turns out it starts doing mitosis or meiosis. Mitosis. Meiosis only happens when we're trying to make what? What is happening in your body when meiosis is happening? In a human being, let's speak up. It's making the sperm or making the eggs. That's not what we're trying to do here. We're trying to make babies. Sperm and eggs have already been made. Here we're trying to make new cells for the baby. So it starts to cleave through mitosis. But it's cleaving so fast that it's dividing before the cells get a chance to grow. So the ball of cells stays the same size, but it gets split into separate cells. And very quickly, it organizes itself into a hollow ball of cells called the blastula. So this is that first zygote splits a lot and hollows itself out and makes this hollow ball of cells called the blastula. That's the beginnings of a baby. Now, fairly soon thereafter, the cells in that hollow ball start to move around. They start to organize themselves into 3 distinct layers of cells. Those 3 layers that form are called the germ layers. And those 3 layers of cells that are going to form all take on a different function. They're named from outside to inside. The outermost layer of cells makes sense that it would be called the ectoderm, which that word literally means what? Ectoderm. What ectoderm mean? We just talked about ecto in class today. What's ecto? Here's some. Outside. And derm means skin. It means outside skin, but it's the outer germ layer. Meso means middle, and endo means inside, obviously. These 3 layers are going to make different parts of your body. The outside layer, the ectoderm, is going to make certain parts. The mesoderm is going to make different parts, and the endoderm is going to make different parts. Once those cells get aligned and separated into their 3 germ layers, the ball of cells gets a different name. It's called the gastrula. So it's the blastula before it organizes itself into those 3 germ layers. Once it gets into those 3 layers, it's called the gastrula. Let me show you some pictures before we go any further. That's what the blastula looks like. It's hollow in here. Here's some cells on the outside of each side. Now here's the gastrula. It's only got two of the layers labeled, endo and ecto, but in here would be meso in the middle. And notice that it's that blastopore, that's an opening. It started to pinch in on itself. What's that called when something pinches in on itself? Imagination. Imagination. It starts to imaginate. And that imagination turns out to be really important. What do you think that tube inside the ball of cells becomes? What's the tube inside you? You have a tube that runs all the way through your body. It's called your digestive system, your GI tract. Okay? That tube becomes your digestive system. This hole, what's called the blastopore, what do you think it becomes? What do you think that hole is in you? It's still there. What do you think it is? Turns out it's the anus. Kind of appropriate that the rear end forms first in people, right? Turns out there's only a couple of groups of animals where that opening becomes the anal opening. Vertebrates, starfish, echinoderms. All the other animals, guess what that hole becomes? The mouth. Okay? And we'll talk about the differences between those in a second. But this initial opening into the ball of cells in vertebrates, chordates, becomes the anus. Also in echinoderms, which are like starfish and sea urchins and things like that. In all the other animals, this becomes the mouth. But in both groups, this becomes your GI tract, your digestive system. All right, we brought that up. Let me backtrack to our first slide first. So we get fertilization, followed by cleavage, followed by organizing into three germ layers, gastrulation, and then lastly we get organogenesis. That word should tell you everything you need to know. What's genesis mean? Everybody thinks it means beginning, not what it means. What else might Genesis mean, the Bible of Genesis? Creation. So it's the creation of organs. Creation of organs. This is when these germ layers start making organs. Organogenesis. All right, now we mentioned that initial hole in the gastrula, the blastopore. In some animals, that hole becomes the mouth. Those animals are called protostomes. What's proto mean? Like a prototype. What is it? It's the first. And it turns out stome means mouth or opening. Where have we seen that root before? S-T-O-M. Stomata. Where's the stomata? It's on the bottom of a leaf, right? It's like the opening on a plant leaf where it breathes, where it takes in CO2 and breathes out oxygen. It means hole or mouth. So this word literally means first mouth. And it's called that because the first opening in the gastrula is the mouth. Now I want you to notice something. The protostomes include all these phyla. Anybody know what porifera are? What kinds of animals are in that group? Porifera. Sponges. Those are like sponges. Cnidaria. You should know something about cnidarians. Anybody have any idea what those are? Not full of answers today. Those are like jellyfish. These guys, platyhelminthes, those are flatworms, like tapeworms. Nematodes are roundworms, like hookworms. Annelids are yet another kind of worm. These are like earthworms. They're segmented kind of worms, like earthworms and leeches. Mollusks are things like clams and oysters. Also starfish, or not starfish, octopus and squid, snails and slugs, clams, scallops. Just keep going. And then the last one of these groups are arthropods. That's one you gotta know. What's arthro mean? Like arthritis. What's arthritis a problem with? Your joints, okay? Arthritis literally means what's going on with your joints. What's ITIS mean? Inflammation. Inflammation of the joints. They're swollen. Arthropod means jointed what? POD. What does that mean? We talked about pseudopods not long ago. Feet, or legs, or appendages. Arthropods are what kind of animals? What kind of animals have lots and lots of joints? Insects. Insects. Not just insects, though. Also spiders. Also crustaceans like shrimp and lobsters. Are you segmented? Yeah. Any animal that has joints is segmented. What's the advantage of being segmented? It lets you do stuff you couldn't do without it, right? I mean, think about if your hand didn't have any joints in it. I mean, you couldn't do much with it, right? Well, you really couldn't even do that because you wouldn't have this joint either, right? So you just, I guess that'd be all your hands would be for. Couldn't do a whole lot with it. So joints are pretty important. We're in a group, though, called deuterostomes, and that means mouth second. Didn't mean to do that. So that blastopore in us forms the anus first, and later it invaginates on through to form another opening on the other side, and that becomes the mouth. As I said before, there's only two groups of animals that are considered deuterostomes. What are the chordates? You are a chordate. What are chordates? Phylum Chordata is a name you need to know. The Phylum Chordata. That's a name you need to know. That's the phylum you belong to. Those are the vertebrates. Vertebrates. And then echinoderms. We see that skin root again. Echino means spiny. Spiny skins. These are things like starfish, sea urchins. Have you ever touched a sea urchin before? Spiny, sticky, spiny skin. But the reason we're in this group is because our embryos both develop in a way such that what opening forms first? Anal opening forms first. And what do scientists say that must mean about echinoderms and vertebrates? It must be the two most related groups, or at least echinoderms are the most related group to vertebrates, according to this, because their embryos develop in very similar ways. All right, now these are our three germ layers, and sort of what they do. The endoderm is the germ layer that makes most of the inner parts of your body, things like your digestive system, your lungs, your liver, your pancreas, which really are both part of what? Your liver and your pancreas are both part of what system? Digestive system. Even though food doesn't go through them directly, they make things that help in digestion. All right, the middle layer inside that gastrula, the mesoderm, makes stuff that's mostly in the middle of your body. What's the dermis? What part of the skin? The middle layer of your skin. It's not the outside part you can see, it's the part just underneath that. Makes your bones, your cartilage, most of your blood vessels, your kidneys, your reproductive organs, your muscles, and also all the body cavities, your linings, the spaces in your body, they're all lined with membranes. It makes the membranes that line those body cavities. And then that outermost layer makes things that typically are on the outside of your body, like the epidermis. And that is what? The outer layer of skin, the part you can see. Big parts of the nervous system. Most of the sense organs that are on the outside part of your body, like your ears and your eyes. It makes the enamel of your teeth, which is the outside part of your teeth. The epithelium of the mouth, the nose, the salivary glands, and the anus. Epithelium is not just on the outside, it's the linings of any kind of opening. So the epithelium in your nose, mouth, salivary glands, and so these are the 3 layers of cells in the gastrula and the organs and different body parts that they make. What's another word we might use for these cells? Any of these cells, what's a word we might use to describe them? That you hear on TV sometimes. Cells that can grow up to be whatever they want to be. What do we call them? Stem cells. These are your body's stem cells. The cells that make you. All your cells have the same DNA, right? Every cell in your body has the same DNA. But if you took a heart cell out of your body right now, could you make a skin cell out of it? No, because it's grown up. It decided what it wanted to be when it grew up, and it can't go back. But these cells haven't decided what they want to be yet. And they have the potential to be what? Anything. And they can be. And that's what the germ layers do. This is where they decide what they're supposed to be, and they make those parts. All right, another thing we need to talk about is body cavities. A body cavity is obviously just a space in your body, mostly for holding what? Mostly for holding your organs. Anybody ever watch like House or ER when they have to do open heart surgery? What do they do to the ribs? They put this big metal thing in there, yank it open, and they just spread the ribs. They call it a rib spreader. And what you see once they spread those ribs open is there's a big space there. And that space is mostly filled up with organs. But that space is your body cavity. We have a really big body cavity. Some organisms, though, on the other hand, have no body cavity. They're said to be acoelomate. This means no, the coelom is the body cavity. No body cavity. If you don't have a body cavity, that also should tell you probably don't have what? Organs. What's an animal without any organs? What kind of animals don't have any organs? They're only just collections of cells or tissues. Jellyfish. What else? Sponges. That's about it. Okay? Jellyfish and sponges, and some of your worms, like your flatworms, maybe acoelomate. They're really simple. They're just cells or maybe tissues, but they're not complicated enough to have any real organs. How do things move around in organisms that are acoelomate, like nutrients and waste and stuff like that? If they don't have any organs, that means they can't have a heart and blood vessels. So how does stuff move around? Just diffusion and osmosis. No circulatory system at all. All right, some organ. I'm going to skip this one in the middle for a minute because it's kind of confusing. I'm going to drop down to the bottom one. Coelom. This is the name for your body's cavity, your main body cavity, coelom. What's unique about it is it's made from the mesoderm. That's the germ layer that makes this body cavity. Coelom. It's found in most animals. Most animals have a big body cavity made from the mesoderm. That includes things like the annelids. Anybody remember what we said those were? Annelids? Sort of like earthworms and leeches, segmented worms. The mollusks are like clams and oysters, scallops, snails, slugs. The arthropods, we said, were what? Insects and crustaceans. The echinoderms, we said, were what? Starfish, sea urchins, stuff like that. And then the chordates, our group, which is the vertebrates. So all these animals that I just circled, we all have a body cavity made from the mesoderm. There's one main animal group, though, that we haven't mentioned. And that other main animal group are called the nematodes. They're the roundworms, hookworms that you can get from walking out barefooted. They can drill into your feet outside. These guys have a body cavity, but it's made a different way. Instead of being made by the mesoderm, it's made by a combination. It's found in between these two germ layers. That's where it forms. It forms in between the endoderm and the mesoderm. So their body cavity is made a little bit different way. So it's called a pseudocoelom. What's pseudo mean? No, pseudo means false ceiling. It's not really a false body cavity. It's just made differently than this one is. That's why it's got a different name. It's made a different way in the embryo. But the only animal group that has this one are the nematodes. All the other animals that have a body cavity have a regular ceiling. All these groups. All right, I want to take about 5-10 minutes and talk about our very first group. We're going to go through all these animal phyla in the next week or two. The first phyla we're going to talk about are the most simple animals, sponges. Now you might look at a sponge and say, hey, that thing looks a lot more like a plant than an animal. Because it sort of does, right? A sponge really doesn't look much like an animal that we would think. But it turns out there's 4 things that really make animals be animals on a cell level. Somebody tell me on a cell level what makes an animal be an animal. Again? No cell wall. That's true. No cell wall. Animal cells don't have walls. Somebody tell me something else about animal cells. How about this? They're eukaryotic. Got to have a nucleus to be an animal cell. Multicellular. And we're missing one main thing. What one main thing are we missing? Can't do photosynthesis, so what's the word for that? Cannot do photosynthesis. Heterotrophs. If an organism has cells with these 4 characteristics, it's an animal. This is what makes an animal be an animal. No cell walls, eukaryotic, multicellular, heterotrophic. If any kind of organism has cells with those 4 characteristics, it's going to be classified as an animal. So sponges have all these things. They're multicellular, no cell walls, eukaryotic, heterotrophs. They are considered to be the most simple animal group. And what makes them simple is they don't even have tissues or organs, which means they're simply a collection of what? What comes before tissue? Cells. They're just a clump of cells. No tissues, no organs. They're not very organized. They have no circulatory system or nervous system. No brain, no spinal cord, no heart, no blood vessels. They don't even have a body cavity because they don't need it. They don't really have any organs. Now, a word a second ago that I didn't use, that I probably should have, is this word right here. Triploblastic. Well, looking at that word, triplo must mean what? 3. And what that refers to are the 3 germ layers. Not triploblastic means that its embryo does not have 3 germ layers. Doesn't have 3 germ layers. It never goes into that stage where those develop, the gastrula stage. Never forms a gastrula. What these sponges do, in terms of getting food, is they're filter feeders. We'll see a picture here as we get ready to leave. They pull in water, they filter out little algae and protists and things like that, and that's what they eat. A lot of them are hermaphroditic, which you guys should know means what? Hermaphroditic. One organism, both what? Both sexes. One organism, both sexes. Also, most all sponges are sessile. That may be a new word for somebody. Anybody know what that means? Sessile. They cannot move. For most sponges, the only time they can move is when they're very early on, they're a larva to begin with. They start off by sperm and egg, just like you do, and that forms a larva. That larva looks like a little protozoan. It can swim around. And it's going to swim until it finds what? What's the sponge looking for when it's a larva? A nice big rock or something. And it finds that rock and it glues itself to it. And then it grows into what we think of as a sponge. So during the larval stage, it's pretty much the only time it can move. Sorry about that. So let's look at how they eat. Let me show you how they eat, first of all. They're in phylum Porifera, which refers to the fact they got lots of pores. You can see those pores all over the body. In terms of how they eat, the water gets pulled in through those pores, as you can see with these black arrows and my arrows, into this big open cavity in the middle of the sponge. That cavity is lined with cells with little flagella. And you can see those cells are called collar cells. And these little flagella whip around. And they sort of create a tornado effect, like what you would get in a bathtub. What does that little tornado do to water? Sucks it in, right? So the water gets sucked into this cell. And when it gets sucked in, what does the cell do? It takes out anything you can use. Protozoans, algae, whatever may be in there. So it filters that out. So these little collar cells filter out the food, and that's how it eats. Then the water that it's filtered goes out the top. There's a big hole at the top, and it's called the osculum. So in through the pores, filtered by the collar cells, out through the top. That's sort of the way it works. Let me back up a couple slides. In terms of how they're made, a sponge doesn't really have a skeleton like you have, but it does have some supports inside. Some sponges have a protein inside them called spongin, which is sort of like rebar. We talked about rebar in here before. Where did you find rebar? Like a bridge support. It's little pieces of metal that they put inside concrete in order to make the concrete what? Stronger and able to bend a little bit. That's what this acts like. There's little pieces of protein spread out in the body to support. Other sponges have this stuff called spicules. And these spicules are made out of either silicon dioxide, which is like glass, or calcium carbonate, which is what? Compound you should have studied in chemistry. What's calcium carbonate? Limestone. Sometimes also called what else? Chalk. So their little supports are either made out of protein, a glass-like material, or chalk. But either way, whichever one they have, the function is to support. Give them some support. And then the final thing we'll mention today is how they reproduce. One way is by budding. Budding is a type of asexual reproduction. And what that means is, let's say this was a sponge. That sponge may grow almost like a little tumor on the side. And eventually that little tumor just splits off and forms its own thing. Genetically identical to the one it came from, right? What's the advantage of asexual reproduction? It's quick. What's the disadvantage? No variation. Everything's the same. Now that might be a good thing if it's a really good sponge, right? It might be a good thing until something comes along that it can't handle, like some kind of disease, some kind of predator, and it's got problems. The other way they reproduce is sexually, and what happens is that some sponges will release sperm into the water. Those sperm have to swim through the water until they find another sponge, find an egg inside that sponge, and fertilize it. In sponges, sperm plus egg forms a larva. And that larva is flagellated. It has flagella, and it can swim. And as I said earlier, it's going to swim around until it finds a good rock, pulls itself down, and then it grows into a full-grown sponge. Any of you been snorkeling like on a reef before? You see sponges there. Most of the time they're colored. They've got pretty colors most of the time. But I'm going to tell you that sponges on their own have basically no color. They're sort of a tan, brown, yuck kind of color. All the pretty colors that you see in tropical sponges come from algae or protists that live with them, like a symbiotic kind of relationship. What could an algae or a protist give to a sponge that would be helpful to the sponge? What can algae do? Algae can do photosynthesis, right? So they can make sugar. What is the sponge giving to the algae? A place to live, a home, a protection. So it's a mutualistic kind of thing. It helps them both. The sponges get some food. The algae or the protist, whatever it may be, they get protection and a place to live. Let's see if there's anything else I need to do. Here's a couple pictures. Here's sort of some normal colored sponges, sort of brown and yucky. Here's some more colorful ones, some more pretty ones. And we'll stop there.